Hi, welcome to today's webinar on the art of negotiation, a legal primer for freelancers organized by the Law Society Pro Bono Services Office in collaboration with Bloomberg LP. My name is Liansheng. I'm your moderator for today. There are some housekeeping matters before we get started. Firstly, please do not take any screenshots or share the materials here without the permission of the organizers. Feel free to ask questions during the webinar. You can type them into the questions pane, which you can see on the right side of your screen, and click send. Your questions will only be seen by the organizer, and we'll try our best to address them during the seminar as well as at the end of the talk. Please note that any discussion and any materials provided today is not intended to substitute or constitute professional legal advice. You should consult a lawyer if you require any further legal advice on your own personal matters. All right, with the housekeeping matters done, let's get right into the seminar today. Actually, I'm very excited for today's seminar because this is a topic that affects many freelancers out there, and freelancers face this issue of negotiations day in, day out. This is also the first time that LSPBSO, the Law Society Pro Bono Services Office, is collaborating with Bloomberg LP, and I hope that there will be many more such collaborations to come. For today's webinar, you will see that we have Shakti Sadashiv. Shakti is a Singapore qualified lawyer who was a practicing litigator for 5 years prior to joining Bloomberg's legal team. Shakti's experience spans mediations, negotiations, trial matters covering a range of issues, from civil disputes, general commercial matters, insurance, and contractual disputes. At Bloomberg, Shakti's role covers negotiating as well as managing contracts for the various services offered by Bloomberg to its customers. In her free time, Shakti enjoys riding her motorcycle and playing board games. Next, we also have Jeremiah Choy, a familiar face for a lot of our webinars. Jeremiah is a trained lawyer. He left practice in 1997 to become a creative director, producer, and curator. Jeremiah has been involved in both local and international events and productions. Jeremiah is an advocate for freelancers. So Shakti and Jeremiah, thank you both for joining us today.
Good evening.
Thank you. Good evening. Thanks for having us.
Yes.
And thanks everyone for making time for this webinar today.
Yes, I'm sure they will learn a lot today. So today's webinar, it is separated into two parts. Firstly, Shakti will share with us some insights on negotiation, what makes a good and effective negotiation, as well as what are the things to consider when we're negotiating with someone. Then we will have a panel discussion with Jeremiah and Shakti. We'll chat about situations that we have heard or come across in our experience where negotiations do not seem to be going very well, and discuss some methods or steps you can take to improve the situation or deal with the other party during the negotiations. Lastly, we will close off the webinar after these two parts with a Q&A session, and we will answer the queries of the attendees. Feel free to ask any questions, and we'll do our best to address them. Negotiations is actually a topic that's very close to my heart because negotiations happen day in, day out. You know, negotiations could be simply you having a short banter with the vegetable auntie at the wet market, or it could even be you discussing your next big project with the producer, right? And today's webinar, we really hope that you can get away with some introduction into the art of negotiation, learn some skills as well as steps to take when one is negotiating with the other party. So really, Shakti, when it comes to negotiation, what should we do to prepare ourselves for a negotiation?
Yeah, Liansheng, that's a very good starting point actually, because I think a lot of the times, as you said, we don't realize we're negotiating even in our daily lives. You know, when you are going to sit down for a formal negotiation or for a formal talk, it is very important to mentally prepare yourself. So setting your mindset or your mind frame out in a position where you feel comfortable with your stand and are able to advocate for yourself strongly and clearly is really very important. So some of it is some of the things that we have heard from generally about mindfulness, as well as about calming yourself and manifestation. These are some words that are thrown around. To put it very simply, I think the most important thing is that you have to have a clear position in your mind as to what exactly your goal is from a particular negotiation. That is important. And the second is also not to feel panic or any of the other common emotions that come when people feel that they are put on a spot. Now, obviously, it's very easy to say this, very difficult to execute. But one good way of dealing with it is when you have enough information on hand. That definitely helps deal with those difficult emotions, because these tend to show very clearly when you are negotiating. Even if you do think you're doing a great job, many times it's obvious to the other party, and that actually is how the negotiations tend to go awry if you don't have that mental preparation ahead of time.
Yeah. So from what I hear, it seems to be one, mentally preparing yourself, and two, also considering what are your needs or wants, or what are the outcomes you're trying to achieve. I was wondering, Jeremiah, feel free to chip in if you have any thing to share as well, given your experience. With negotiations, I think the other party is also an important part to play. Whether we have to do we also should we also think about what the other party is thinking, what are the possible scenarios, etc.
Definitely, I think you need to do your homework, as what Shakti just said, and you have to be mentally prepared to go into a negotiation. I mean, I want to share this at the very beginning. I learned something from a good mentor who said that he who can walk away wins, right? What does it mean? Meaning that if I come into a negotiation and if I can walk away, right, then I think I will have an upper hand in the negotiation with the other person. Meaning that I know what are my bottom lines, and beyond the bottom lines, I would not accept it. And as a result of it, I can just walk away and still remain friends with my negotiation partner and not be screaming and yelling and creating a very awful environment as it is. So this mental preparation, as Shakti shared, is you need to do homework. You need to do you need to find out what you want and what the other party wants. What is the bottom line, and how to put yourself in the position that if it comes to that really difficult situation and you really don't want to do it for various reasons, maybe artistic reasons, integrity reasons, money reasons, whatever it is, then be prepared to walk away. And if you're able to do that, then every negotiation you go in, you feel like you are the winner when you come out of it.
So Shakti, really, what does it mean to find what's your bottom line?
That is definitely a difficult thing, and frankly a lifelong experience. And because very simply, the bottom line changes every time. And the bottom line changes not just in the situation you're in, or the type of contract you're negotiating, but the other party as well. Like Jeremiah pointed out, your bottom line can vary person to person. So with one particular producer, you may take a particular like upper limit or lower limit, as you can say, or that's the bottom line. And with another party, it can be totally different. And this has got to do again with the bargaining powers between the parties. Sometimes it may be worth, therefore, balancing out other factors versus your bottom line that can affect your bottom line, which basically ties back to the whole first point of why it's so important to do the homework and why it's so important to mentally prepare yourself for a negotiation. This is too much for one human brain to handle during the course of the negotiation itself. Of course, that doesn't mean that just because you prepare in advance it's going to be smooth sailing. It's still going to be a challenging task, but at least you have done some of the homework ahead of time. And even if you have not explored the full range as to where this negotiation goes, because end of the day you can't predict what the other party is going to say, but you can have or have considered in your mind various reasonable outcomes or various probable outcomes. And most of the time it is unlikely that you're going to be negotiating with a party who comes out with a solution or a proposal that is so out of this world that you have never considered it before. And honestly, my advice is, if you do face such a situation, then you shouldn't be trying to find a solution on that day itself. You should actually take the time to go back with that thought of that proposal, and then consider the matter again from that perspective. Because if you have done the homework, you would reasonably expect perhaps maybe 50% or 60% of what that person would say. And therefore, exploring remaining 50 or 60% cuts down the amount of emotional energy and mental energy that is required from you to conduct a negotiation, and it will also help you hold your line and hold your position, and therefore successfully advocate for yourself.
So preparation seems to be really very important in order to have a successful negotiation. From what I hear, preparation not just in terms of what you want, but also in terms of what are the possible outcomes, what's the possible problem that might arise, what's the bottom line. I mean, these are all very useful things to think about. It's almost like having a rehearsal and run through in your head before you step into a meeting, a negotiation. And really, it also reminds me of what I as a lawyer do a lot of the times when I go in to discuss things with my clients, or even have mediations with my clients as well. Yeah. So Shakti, do you have any tips for what makes an effective negotiation?
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of tips everywhere. I'm sure that everybody at this stage in their life has negotiated something or another, even if not professionally, with your parents, with your siblings. It's turned up pretty much everywhere in our lives. I mean, all of those tips are probably helpful, but I think these 5 in particular kind of consolidate the flow of the negotiation. I think if you look at the first 2 tips, we can put that down to a pre-negotiation stage in a way, where you, or early stage of negotiation, where you deal with mindset. The third tip kind of deals with setting the ground for the negotiation while it is happening, and tips 4 and 5 talk about working through that negotiation process and continuing to build a good relationship with the other party, because the negotiation means that it's not a one-time relationship with that party, right? That's not the only time you're talking to them. In fact, the whole point of the negotiation is to build a lasting relationship, and that's where like point 4 and 5 come in. So these 5 tips actually kind of, if we go through them today, will take us through the flow of how one should prepare for negotiation and try and conduct oneself. Okay, at least keep this in mind when we approach a negotiation.
Sure. Then shall we start with the first 2 tips? I think the mindset seems to be very important when it comes to negotiation.
Yes, of course. There's tips 1 and 2. Like I said, I think we can broadly put them under mindset. And if you notice, the first one is dampening your adversarial adversarial urge. Now, the word dampen is really important, because we are talking about, in this case, not eliminating your adversarial urge. At the end of the day, a negotiation is not quite a battle, and one should not try and think of it that way. You're not going to war with another party. You are trying to build a relationship with another party, but at the same time trying to protect your self-interest as well, and advocate for yourself appropriately and properly. So it is important also at the same time not to think of it as a chit chat with friends. So you can't just let your guard down entirely and not be aware that at the end of the day, no one else is advocating for you but you in a negotiation. The other party is looking out for himself or herself. And similarly, you must do the same. However, bearing this in mind, the difficulty arises in finding a nice balance between the two. Again, it is very common for human emotions to make things very high strung. And a lot of the times, people, when placed in a position where they have to defend themselves or advocate for themselves, they feel panic and they feel stressed. And that leads to a lot of change in tone, for instance, high volume, high pitch, uh, rushing through points, for instance. And what you think when you speak this way, or approach a negotiation this way, what you see as a sign of strength actually comes off as a sign of weakness to the other party. And unfortunately, it's again difficult to have this sort of self-reflection during the negotiation. It is therefore important that we are mindful that as human beings, we are sensitive like beings ourselves. And it is important that if you come off or you give off these uncomfortable vibes, or either overly adversarial vibes or overly defensive vibes or panicked vibes, then the other party is going to view automatically you're starting the negotiation off in an uncomfortable position. The other party is able to subconsciously try and exert some kind of control or power over you. And it's not that they're consciously taking advantage of you, but that's natural human like instinct, right? And again, you both are trying to get something from each other. So it is important to mentally prepare yourself, like we have spoken, and dampen this adversarial urge. So some part of it is regulating tone, keeping notes, keeping and trying to stick to the negotiation objective. Try not to get derailed. And notes are very helpful in that regard, because something written down allows you to come back to the point and try and see. It's then easy to see how far you strayed.
Yeah. So you mentioned dampening your adversarial urge, and I see a very interesting question from one of our attendees. You know, in the event if you are emotional or you start to raise your voice or you become very adversarial, one of the questions that the attendees ask is, do you think it's feasible to bring a friend along during negotiations? Can this friend help you to regulate yourself? What are your thoughts about that, Shakti?
That's an interesting viewpoint. I think friend like moral support, in a way is great. But this really has to do with the nature of the negotiation, I think, and whether it is appropriate in a context to do that. Now, if let's say this friend is someone who perhaps you're negotiating on behalf of your production house, for instance, and this friend that you're talking about is a colleague in that production house who is aware of this negotiation and what you hope to achieve from it, and perhaps is more evenly is more even keeled about this and has a more measured manner of speaking or is clearer, then yes, I think that would be a good suggestion. However, if let's say this is something personal, a private gig, for instance, or a particular the only beneficiary from this contract or from this relationship would be you, for instance, then it would be very inappropriate, I think, to bring a friend, because the other party then is again, it will reveal your, I guess, lack of confidence in yourself. And having someone advocate for you who is not perhaps formally a lawyer or has that sort of like professional relationship with you may not display the kind of strength or the kind of position that you want to display to the other party. However, I would recommend having friends help you prepare in advance for a negotiation. That actually may be quite helpful and useful. Many a times in a negotiation, we end up getting so lost in what we want alone that we are unable then to consider how this may come across to somebody else. So just like what you mentioned earlier, we do practice runs for shows and performances. This too is something you could practice with a friend, for instance. And even if the friend may not fully be able to respond, trying it out yourself may give you an opportunity to see whether you are coming off perhaps not in the manner you actually prefer or would want.
Mm. So in order to dampen your adversarial urge, since you are still on that, and I see a lot of questions coming in. One question is, of course, what do you think are good assets that one must possess in order to have this strength, or rather this reminder of dampening your adversarial urge?
I would liken going into a negotiation to playing chess. Because it's almost a strategy that you need to prepare yourself for. Are you prepared to lose your queen? Are you prepared to move your pawn or move your horse against the castle or whatever it is? You as a chess player, mentally you have gone through various scenarios, right? Do I do this opening? Do I do that? Whatever it is, that rehearsal that Shakti said is important. And if you can do that with a friend or a like-minded friend or a level-headed friend, it's important. But if your friend is as equally hot-headed like you, then I would say no, not a good idea to bring that friend into that negotiation, because I see emotion and ego always gets in the way of a negotiation, like as you are playing chess, right? The moment you get angry or you get too aggressive or you're not cool enough or not collected enough to have a sometimes stand back just to see what is your other opponent doing in the meantime, then you lose sight of the negotiation or what is the end goal of your negotiation. It's all about perspectives.
Mm, mm. And with perspective and looking at the end goal, of course, I see tip number 2 as shared problem solving, right, Shakti? Which also happens what Jeremiah was talking about, where you take a step back, you see a bigger picture of the negotiations, and this will hopefully help to prevent egos from rising and for the negotiations to go into a very acrimonious mode.
Absolutely right. I think that's a very good point that Jeremiah raised. This tip really has to do though with when you're talking about shared problem solving. Um, while the chess example is great when it comes to preparing one's mindset for it, at the end of the day, even in chess or even in a negotiation, you are hoping to win, right? You are not hoping to come to a draw or deadlock. That's not helpful. However, a negotiation is slightly different in that sense because you don't really want, while you want to win, the other party also wants to win. And if somebody comes away from the negotiation feeling like they haven't won, that's not going to bode well for your future relationship actually. And that negotiation is to cement an ongoing relationship or to create a new one. So what is important in this case for mindset is, while the first tip is really about making sure that you are able to control your mind and manner in which you control how you approach a negotiation, the second tip is trying to influence the other party to look at the problem as a shared problem that you both want to solve together. So you can't always influence the other party because you may not know them, you don't know how they operate. All of that is, unknowns that unfortunately in the real world you can't control. But what you can try and do is to try and approach a problem, approach a negotiation as if you both are a team, even though you're on other sides of the equation. Um, trying to solve a common problem. In the end, you wouldn't be negotiating if there wasn't something in it for both parties, right? Both parties want to build a relationship. That means both parties have a problem that they feel the other party would be able to help solve. So thinking about it that way, or framing the negotiation in such a manner that you influence the other party to come at it with a problem solving mindset as opposed to an adversarial or I must beat you kind of mindset, will actually help in many situations, actually ends up with much more mutually beneficial results, right? Of course, uh, this is difficult to execute in reality because, like I said, the unknowns of the other party are really sometimes very difficult. But this can be achieved if you try using more neutral language instead. So, for instance, if you have a situation with another party where you are trying to perhaps install perhaps or rather they are trying to commission a piece from you and they have a certain vision for that piece, for instance, then you, instead of framing it, I am providing you with a particular service or I am giving you something, you can frame it neutrally in that the gallery has a particular theme, or this exhibition has a particular theme, and the theme would be so and such a thing, and a painting that would have, for instance, these elements would be beneficial to that theme. That way, when it's framed neutrally, both parties are then able to see, yes, we have a mutual interest in the outcome of a successful product or a successful event. And that really allows a creative solution for both parties, or to consider creative solutions.
So tip 1 is your own perspective. Tip 2 is try to change the other party's perspective, right? That's pretty
Yes,
much in a nutshell.
that's right. That's right.
Yeah. I have a couple of questions, and I think I want to ask those questions before we wrap up to the next slide. And Jeremiah, feel free to chip in if you have any experience to share as well. There are quite a couple of questions about bullying during negotiations. When one party appears to be a bully, how does the other party, right? If you're negotiating with someone and the other party comes off very strong as a bully, what do you do then in this course of negotiations?
I would ask myself, can I walk away? As I said earlier, right? If I can walk away, I would. Because if the person who is going into a negotiation, into a project with you, and it's already bullying you at the negotiation stage, do you really want to go into the project with that person? Of course, I say this from a very privileged point of view that, oh, I don't need this project and therefore I can walk away, right? Sometimes if you have a very strong negotiator on the other side, you can request for a break or a breather. That means if you feel that the person is putting pressure on you or coming on very strong in strong languages or really arm twisting you, like for example, you must sign this contract. The moment you get out of this door, the contract is not up for you anymore. All right, and you're under pressure, then I would say take 5. Ask for a short break. I think it's most reasonable to take a short break from that negotiation and don't get bullied into signing something that you eventually will may regret. All right, so that's how I deal with bullies in that sense. That having said, you yourself don't act as a bully, and I completely feel. For example, I'll give you an example of what happened is that I have a production. I don't have a lot of money to say pay a very good actor who, say for example, is asking for $10,000, but I really want to work with that actor. I only have $5,000. So instead of a no situation, I would then speak to the actor and very, very honestly tell the actor, I really want to work with you, but I only have 5,000. This is my rehearsal schedule. This is what you're required of you. Can you tell me, all right, if I pay you 5,000, what can you do? Do I reduce the number of rehearsals with you? What else can I compensate you? Instead of paying you 10,000. I mean, in other words, apart from dollars and cents, what other things can I give you more credit? Can I give you whatever it is to compensate for that? And this is a real life situation where at the end of the day, I reduce the number of rehearsals with the actor, all right? And he's being paid $5,000, which is less than his usual $10,000 rate. But at the end of the day, it was good for me because he really enjoyed the rehearsals with everybody. That he came on the days that he wasn't supposed to be there. So it's really about perspectives, looking at egos, how to manage the egos, how to manage the emotion at the point of negotiation. And for me, the second mantra of work is, if I don't like to work with you, I don't like the work, then I will put my price a lot. But if I really like the work or I like the project, I don't mind not being paid the usual rate, so to speak. Because as what Shakti said much earlier, every project is different. Every project has got your needs and your wants. Why do you want to do the project? And you measure that in your mind, and then you go into the negotiation of the project and subsequently the project with that mindset. And please, the moment you agree to it, don't regret and don't go back and whine and whatever it is, because you have at the point of negotiation already agreed to it. So no point being negative and going back and say, yeah, I should have asked for more money lah, or whatever it is. It's not good for your project.
Sure. That's just very good advice, actually, very real experiences, because I think that's what happens a lot of times when the artistic companies tend to work on a budget and they have to allocate the resources amongst all the creatives as well as the crew and the other personnel involved in the project as well. So that's another form of negotiation. Yeah, and that nicely brings me into the scenario that I wanted to talk about, which is what I always hear from my actor friends, what I call, I can always find a cheaper alternative, right? Many actors have come up to me and say, hey, I was offered a contract, like what Jeremiah says, but the producer tells me he's only able to pay me a certain rate, which is lower than what I'm usually paid, right? And you as an actor, then you want to negotiate, okay? Or in the course of your negotiation, the producer just simply drops a note and say, hey, you know what? If you want the rate that you're asking for, I can always find a cheaper, a more hungry person as the alternative, right? So Shakti and Jeremiah, any thoughts to share about such a scenario, which is so commonplace in the arts industry?
I think, I mean, I am not in the arts industry myself so closely, but I have to say one actor is not the same as the other actor. I mean, there's no real price on human beings or on the quality of the art that is being produced or the abilities of that person. It's not like buying an NTUC tissue paper and then you compare it with a Kleenex tissue and say, oh, I can buy two boxes for the price of one. Yeah, I mean, even amongst products there is that fine quality difference, and for a baby the two differences may make a difference. For an adult maybe you can't tell, but at the end of the day, when it comes to a human being and an artist, that too in particular, and the quality of the products that you're producing, or the quality of the person and his creativity, that really is this is the worst form of bullying, really. And it frankly is, I would say, degrading to a person. And um, I think Jeremiah's point earlier about knowing that person's value and understanding what exactly you're hoping for when it comes to the quality of whatever production or whatever outcome that you're hoping for, is that the vision that you have in mind? And if that is the case and the producer is happy to go with this so-called cheaper alternative, then it's on that producer, on that person to, I don't know, produce a lower quality show perhaps. But that doesn't mean that you have to be arrogant or brazen and say, oh, I will not take a cent less. It exactly comes back to the first 2 points about mindset. And if you approach this with the other party as a shared problem, the producer wants to produce a good show, the actor wants to find work. It's a shared problem, right? They have a common interest and a common goal. The problem here is the logistics of it, not really the fact that one doesn't want the other. So in such a situation, framing it neutrally actually comes up with, like Jeremiah's situation, you have a creative solution to it, right? It turns out that the actor liked it more than he expected, so that is a really fantastic outcome. But even without that, the problem solving mindset, or this collaborative mindset, or the mindset change, allows both parties to come up with a third alternative, right? Which is not, I increase the money, which is if framed in the original manner, it's a conflicting interest or conflicting goal. One person wants more money, one person wants to give less money. If viewed in such I versus you manner, then it's really cold and there doesn't seem to be a way out of it. One person has to win and the other person has to lose. But there is a third alternative, and the third alternative is writing in a totally new clause into a contract to address the shared problem that both these parties face. One wants to find work, so the work issue is addressed. One has a budgeting issue, so the budgeting issue is addressed. And coming at it from a shared problem perspective, and therefore changing the mindset of both parties, and either party can be willing to suggest this. It doesn't mean that one party is if you are the only person who has this creative solution, you can't, you're forced, and you're stuck with it. The goal really is to try and get the other party to come around to this shared problem solving collaborative mindset. And if they really really do not want to, and they refuse to change their mindset, then frankly speaking, you're better off looking for alternatives work, because this person actually did not come to negotiate, they came to bully. So I mean, this whole webinar and all of the things we are talking about works on the underlying assumption that parties want to negotiate. They may be difficult negotiators or easier negotiators, but they want to negotiate. And if you have identified that the party does not want to negotiate, or you are the party that absolutely does not want to negotiate, then all of this is moot. Bullying, for instance, is not a negotiation technique, that's just bullying. And then in that sort of situation, you have to also understand that if you are being bullied, then another person is being bullied instead of you if you walk away. And yeah, I agree, in the world there are enough human beings and one person would accept it perhaps, but it is not going to get better. That's the difference. Negotiating always has the outcome of a shared or better solution at the end of it. And that really should be the mindset, and that should be the goal.
During
I think,
yeah, Sophie,
no,
let's go ahead.
I also, from another point of view, I completely agree with what Shakti says, but I see sometimes I see this phrase, I can always find a cheaper alternative. I give a separate interpretation to that. I would first find out from that person, what do you mean by cheaper alternative? Because sometimes when I was asked to quote, right, I quote on a more complicated plane, like, oh, when you ask me to do this role, then I think I must do this, I must do this, I must do this. Whereas he just basically asks you to walk across the screen. So it's really, there is no meeting of minds. When the person said I can find a cheaper alternative, I would find out what do you mean by cheaper alternative? What are you requiring of me? Maybe I give you a more expensive quote based on a misunderstanding of what is expected of me. That's one point I take. The second point that I take is maybe you think that I'm not worth that much because you've not worked with me before, right? So I will have to internally find out for myself, have I done my own branding correctly or not? That means, who is he comparing you in the market? Is he comparing you with, say, somebody, say, of this rate, or this range, or this range, or this rates, whatever it is? Because at the end of the day, right, not two actors are the same. Let's be assured of that. And who you are is actually your branding, and your branding is consisting of RIP, reputation, integrity, and professionalism. And reputation of you in the industry, how, when people work with you, when you say you can do it, you will do it. It has integrity and professionalism. You know your lines, you know you are never late, you're always prepared and all that. And therefore, you're more expensive than the cheaper alternative. And maybe your clients need to understand that. So these are the two things that I usually ask myself when somebody says to me, I can find a cheaper alternative. I don't think sometimes they mean to bully you or mean to say that you're not worth that much, but sometimes it's a misunderstanding of that statement.
Yeah, well, then is it then during the negotiations process, how do we try to reduce such misunderstanding? Do you suggest that, for example, we get a little bit more direct with the person that we're communicating with?
I think we should always be direct. I mean, I think, like, for example, let's say, for example, you ask me to come in and do something and I get cast, and then I ask how much am I being cost, right? When I read the script, I think, oh, I have to do this, I have to prepare this, it will take me 10 days of filming, whatever it is, therefore I got, for example, $10,000 again, right? But in the producer's mind, actually, it's a 2-day shoot, and your role is not so complex, therefore you can do it. So in this direct, trying to understand what you mean by a cheaper alternative is because you are, in your mind, my work is not as complex as I think my work would be. Therefore, it's a cheaper alternative you can find. If I understand it, oh, it won't be 10,000, it's just 3,000. You know what I mean? And I won't feel offended because you think that I'm worth 3,000 instead of 10,000, because the work demand, the work prescription is different. So sometimes let's not go ballistic when somebody says, I can find a cheaper alternative, because your understanding of the work requirement or the project requirement is different.
It sounds a lot like when things are being said, maybe it's more important to take a step back and communicate, right? And understand really what are the interests of the party involved. Sometimes, actually, there are a lot of questions about that. How do I make sure that I reduce misunderstanding? How do I make sure that, you know, I negotiate well? From what I hear from Shakti and Jeremiah, a lot of it goes back to communication during the course of negotiations. And how do we even ensure effective communication? Just because you're conversing doesn't mean that things are being communicated across. And those are very good points that Jeremiah has pointed out as well. Yeah. So maybe we move on to the next tip.
Okay, so basically Jeremiah raised like very two good points. Maybe if we were to extract from that anecdote also, we can say that basically he's saying that we need to define a problem lah. So you need to figure out what exactly the problem is. That's problem definition, and also I guess identification of interests and potential differences between the parties. So again, if from the producer's perspective, his consideration or his to him the problem is, yeah, it's just a 2-day shoot, and therefore in his mind the problem is not a big problem at all, but to your mind the problem seems larger, then there's a mismatch between the definition of that problem. And that again needs, Liansheng, like you rightly said, communication is super key, and counter-proposing and reframing, not counter-proposing and reframing things actually helps tease out a lot of this information that gets lost. Now, when we enter a negotiation, part of the thing is we enter with a lot of assumptions in mind, and we enter with a lot of expectations from the other party or from us, which basically sets our baseline. So all the prep work that you've done so far, all the stuff that you've done is on the basis of, I would say, semi-known information until you actually enter the negotiating table or come to that point where you start talking to the other party, right? Up until now, we've just talked about mindset. All of these things are things that you can control. Now, when we enter the negotiating stage, and now we're actually talking to the other party, many things now can suddenly come up that we don't realize. The one important thing over here is when you reframe a particular thing and you turn it around and place it back to them, it also helps the other party define the issue at hand and help you understand better what exactly is going through their mind, what exactly they're hoping to achieve, and therefore whether you are able to provide them with the solution that they need. Now, counter proposal, on the other hand, is like somebody saying, I want you to work for 4 days, and you say, I only want to work for 3, and that's it. It's 4 is not 3 and 3 is not 4. So when you counter propose, it just seems like you're at an impasse, and that's it. Both parties then get defensive, upset, angry. But like as Jeremiah said, if you don't explore the reasons for the 4, if they don't say like perhaps 4 is because they want 1 day of backup shoot in case, because they're doing an outdoor location and it may rain, so they want you to be around for an additional day in case it rains. From your perspective, oh, it will take 3 days and I'm only available for 3, I can finish it in 3, it'll be done. Now, if you counter propose without reframing the issue, then you lose a lot of information, parties become adversarial, you slide back to step 1, and parties get nowhere, right? You don't quite understand. And that's the unfortunate nature of like human behavior. When somebody says no to us, automatically we feel, oh, they have a problem, or this is uncomfortable, or I don't want to do this. When it's reframed, it allows for exploration of shared issues, and it allows both parties the opportunity to consider the other side's perspective. And that's really very important during the course of the negotiation. Now, this perspective thing is not something you can mentally prepare for ahead of time, because again, you don't have the other party's full perspective until you actually speak to them, right? And get the full context to what is happening there. So if you find out the underlying problem, and it requires you then to have multiple conversations with the other party, and many people find this uncomfortable. I'm sure, Liansheng, even as a lawyer, you find it uncomfortable to constantly ask why and what if and is there another way to do this. But the more information you get, it can only be better. And however irritated the other side may feel, when you obviously don't ask questions just for the sake of asking them. There should be a point to asking it. But at the same time, you can also explain to them why you have suggested, or what you had in mind. So instead of saying, if one side says I want 4 days for a shoot, and you say I'm only available for 3, or you have to pay me the same amount for 3 days instead, so explain why you are saying 3. Then suggest to them the reasons for this and what is happening in their mind. The producer may very well, or whoever's the other party, may very well agree with you, actually, because they have context now to your perspective. So another way of dealing with it is not just necessarily perhaps asking them, if let's say they are not the sort of party who is willing and able to give so much information, or for whatever reason are reluctant or reticent in their sharing of information. You can do it in order to help kickstart that conversation and help find out the underlying problem or the underlying interest that both parties have. And really it helps further that effective communication, and will help with finally finding a solution for both parties.
Mm.
I always find,
those.
Sorry, Liansheng. I always find,
Yeah.
just one point to add. I always find going in with a positive mind very important. Don't always suspect the other party, or always put the other party as the enemy or the bad guy, or the person is trying to for want of a better word, create trouble for you or whatever it is. So the exploration must be done in a positive way. But when you feel that you are being pushed into a position or being bullied into a position that you do not want to, either ask for a timeout or stop. It doesn't do you good to be bullied into a situation. So you try all that, the 5 tips or whatever it is, but at the end of the day, right, if it's something that you really, the gut feel, trust your gut. If you really feel that I don't feel comfortable going into this project or working with this person, then don't. Because even at the negotiation point, you don't feel comfortable. Can you imagine working with the person for the next 3 months or 6 months or whatever it is? It's going to be difficult.
So sometimes really looking at a bigger picture and not just being stuck in the scenario at that point in time, right?
Yeah. I mean, so what?
Yeah.
Get thing that you want, right? Get paid $10,000, work 3 days, whatever it is, but you'll be most miserable 3 days because that person feel that you've already taken advantage. I will now make your life difficult, and people like that do exist.
Yes.
Sorry, Liang.
Yeah. No. Sometimes it's just so hard to say no to someone, right?
Yeah. Sadomasochistic people, especially in the creative. Yeah,
that's true. Okay, Shakti, the next 2 tips.
Okay, so this is like I said, we've kind of moving through the course of a negotiation, right? So I would say this is, I mean, all of it is useful at any stage of a negotiation, but really this is trying to secure a good relationship and make sure that you have like a negotiation. The outcome is a negotiation, not just means a successful outcome at that point, but also success going forward. And one way of doing that is to build on their ideas. Now, again, sometimes when people become very stubborn or stuck in a particular position, or they're very insistent on a particular position, rather than, if you can't get them to budge from that particular position, or they're unwilling to listen to an alternative that you've suggested, another way of working around it would be to build on that idea that they already have. So basically, you have to give them a stake in the outcome of the solution that you're hoping to find. So you have to involve them in the process. Human beings don't like to reject their own ideas. So if they think that they were involved in the solution that both parties came up with, even if it is the idea is suggested by you, they will feel involved and happy to go with that outcome, right? And an agreement always becomes easier when both parties are invested in the outcome of the negotiation. And basically you have to try to get the other side to feel ownership of that idea. So the easiest way of doing this is to use we and us language. So when you talk about we, instead of saying you have a vision for this show, you have a vision for this production, it is we have a vision for this production. Even if you're not involved, you're still negotiating your role in this production. You are just the actor who hasn't yet started. You haven't even gotten your lines, nothing. So it doesn't really matter. Treat it as we and us. And that makes the other party feel, hey, I'm not alone in this. This person is already invested. They already feel a part of this production. It makes them feel like you are a teammate already, and allows then you the opportunity to build on whatever idea they have and incorporate whatever ideas you may have over and above whatever ideas or suggestions they may have. That way you actually can tweak whatever position that they are from. And so this is an alternate technique. If you can't supplant an idea of yours, then you tweak or modify an idea of theirs. And this may work, for instance, when you are having particular problems with, let's say, what you see as like the most important clause in a contract, something that is completely fundamental to the contract to you. It could be money, it could be your time, it could be, again, artistic integrity, IP rights, any of these things. Whatever it is, building on their ideas always makes the other party feel included. And using us and we language is actually the easiest way to get their mind to believe that you are in it with them.
And tip 5, appealing to the other party's senses.
Okay, so at this stage, really, when you're talking about this again, when encountering difficult negotiators, the temptation is always to strike back and behave like for like. If they are difficult, you also want to be difficult. If they are being nasty, you also want to be nasty. Unfortunately, that's not going to get anybody anywhere. And no one, even if they cannot recognize their perhaps difficult behavior, they will definitely recognize yours. So that's not going to be helpful in a negotiation. Now, in order to move a difficult negotiator or have his behavior change, they must believe that some movement is better than no movement. So basically, the more they have to gain, the easier your job will be in the end. And trying and adopting a slightly more conciliatory approach, meaning not defensive, not aggressive, actually will help in this regard. And listening is the easiest way to do this, and asking questions when the temptation is always to talk and tell your position. Listening and asking position helps them lower their guard and allows you insight into their thoughts and the manner in which, or the reason why they're approaching this negotiation and the manner in which they're negotiating. I mean, at the end of the day, human beings are social creatures. They want to feel heard and they want to have people empathize and understand their position. And coming from this, I also have to say that please, as far as possible, try and have a negotiation in person. I know in the virus it's tough and difficult, but even a video call or even a phone call is so much better than an email, because in an email you actually don't, you tone is lost, even the weight of that point is lost in an email, because in an email every point has the same amount of weightage. If you spend 2 lines talking about every single clause in a contract, then the clause on like fees and the clause on like insurance or whatever it is seem to have the same weightage, but in reality it's not the case, and every contract differs. And when you speak to the person and you hear it in their voice, if they spend 30 seconds on a particular clause, then it's unlikely it's as important to them as the clause they spent 2 hours talking about. So when you are able to speak to them and you appeal to their senses and appeal to their humanity and the fact that they have feelings and are human beings, listen to their tone, you will be able to understand their perspective a lot better. You'll be able to hear the frustration in their voice. You'll be able to guess where exactly they're coming from. And the same works for you. If you sound down and out because you're being bullied into taking a $5,000 salary, it's very likely that the other party realizes, oops, perhaps this is not they may not want to go so hard on you. I'm not saying you should act every time you're on the phone, but um, definitely these are things that get lost in an email. And in an email, um, it tends to be cold. It just tends to be difficult to read and understand, and you feel like you're talking to a robot always. And it's very easy to bash a robot. It's very easy to say, no robot, I do not want to negotiate with you. But it's very hard to tell another human being, no human being, I think you are useless and I don't think your work is valuable at all. It's much harder. So even if the negotiator doesn't want to be a nasty person, sometimes it may come across that way on email or come across that way in written communication, simply because of the nature of the communication. Speaking to another person and ideally meeting them, because you do get a lot of like body language cues also from the other side. All of that definitely helps for an effective negotiation, effective communication, and also helps build a long lasting relationship with the other side.
Actually, hearing from Shakti, a lot of it, I have an epiphany, which is actually a lot of the tips that are being shared goes down to really how we lead our lives as well as human beings. Listening more, thinking about the other party, being self-aware about your own needs and concerns, and then see how then to find a mutually cooperative way to resolve a problem together. That seems to be what I'm hearing about what makes a good and effective negotiation. We have about half an hour left. I want to go through some scenarios as well as some discussions about the scenarios, since we have Jeremiah with us. This is what I call the scenario of the battle of two creatives, or a term that I heard or see in the questions from the attendees is the battle of a toxic personality. For example, you have a person who is obviously a designer and he's designing for a client who insists on changing every bit, who insists to be the designer himself, even though he's hired you as a designer. And he doesn't really seem to see your role as a designer. He seems to see it more as an executor of your design rather than a collaborative designer, right? And of course, this designer now feels that very frustrated. None of his ideas have been accepted or being taken into consideration by the person who has hired him. Jeremiah, what do you think? What is your advice to this poor designer that has to deal with such a difficult personality?
Unfortunately, this happens all the time. Corporate clients thinking that they are creatives, or they're as good as creatives. A person who just took one course in filmmaking thinks that she is a film director. That sort of things. I've counted a lot of things. I think it's important. For me, I think the best solution to it is for B to really understand why is Y thinking that his design is not good enough, or is it because Y has very definite ideas about what the design should be. I rather work with a client who's got a very definite idea of whether they want or they don't want that particular design than a client who's like, I don't know, why do you produce 80 drafts before I make a decision, that sort of things, right? So and then once you understand the where is Y coming from and why is Y insisting on this certain designs, whatever it is, then I would use Shakti's point number 4 or point number 3 to try and make it sound as if the idea comes from Y, and then relook it in a different way and say, oh, it's a very good idea, but what about this? Your idea is brilliant, but can I just tweak this like that? And it's about ego sometimes, and it's about perspective sometimes. And so Y suddenly realizes that actually we're on the same side and we're not fighting so much anymore. But if unfortunately Y remains to be very controller, one of those people who just cannot let them,
Yeah.
yeah. So then you will have to bite the bullet, finish the project, and never ever work with Y again unless the pay is very high. You see, but I feel that it is important in any situation, all right? Even if you're an employee, all right, we're not slaves. Even if you're an employee, you have a right to negotiate any situation, be it a contract, be it a way of doing things or whatever it is. I also come to realize that, if you want things done your way, you do it yourself. If you hire somebody else to do it, then let the person know what you want and let the person find the solution to do it the way you want it. If you want to control so much, that person must be a very miserable person at the end of the day, because then everything is a bottleneck, must go through you, must go through you, must go through you, and then you're OCD about things, right? Then nobody really wants to work with you, because then the person will become not a collaborator, not even an employee. It becomes a slave, because the slaves have got no say in whatever the master wants. There's no alternative, no initiative, no nothing. Do you want to be in that position? And if you do not want, then you have to do something about it, because the right to negotiation in every single work that you do, you have the right. I find it strange that a lot of creative industry people don't even dare to negotiate a contract. They were just handed the contract, just sign, and that's it. They don't even read it. And then after that, they complain and they land themselves into a lot of troubles and problems subsequently, right, Liansheng? We've seen a lot of situations like that. And it's because I don't think they believe that they have the right to negotiate. We need to change that mindset.
Yeah, no, I think it's very important, because I at the end of the day, it is your job, right? You have to look out for your own interests, and what we're sharing at the webinar today really is about giving you some tips for you to make sure that your own interests are being taken care of, but not necessarily in a very angry way, but in a way where hopefully you can resolve disputes and make it easier for yourself as a freelancer. Yeah. Shakti, anything to add about this? I mean, Jeremiah used your point 4.
Yeah, absolutely, Jeremiah. That's great. I think all of this really is the mindset that everybody must have in life, creative or not creative, is that you are advocating for yourself. You must advocate for yourself, and there's no harm in advocating for yourself. And it doesn't matter in which arena you're advocating, your skills or your talents in. Whatever it is, nobody else will do that job for you but you. If you are hoping to build a name for yourself or have a reputation or even just find normal job satisfaction, right? In order for that to happen, you must be your own supporter. And the first stage of doing that really is at the negotiation stage, because there is a formal opening for you to do that there. Now let us assume B did his job at the negotiation stage, and actually he negotiated what he thought was like the best deal, and he thought he found all the information, and unfortunately he didn't realize this Y is a toxic personality or a micromanager or a narcissist or any of the nasty personalities that we may unfortunately come across. Now, in that situation, if B feels miserable and does not continue to advocate for himself, because the negotiating is an ongoing thing, right? Like we said, the negotiation doesn't stop just because you signed the contract. That is just to make sure that on paper you formally have the terms that you think are relevant and important to you. But the point of negotiating those terms was to establish a relationship. It was to build a good relationship. It was to have a lasting relationship. And like Jeremiah said, if you're going to have a miserable time, like no matter how much money they pay you for the period of time this guy is a freelance designer, his life is a living hell. How much money is that worth? And I'm sure all of us have been stuck in those uncomfortable positions before and say, yeah, if the guy paid me $1 million also, I wouldn't have taken it. But I mean, you obviously didn't have the foresight to advocate for $1 million then, but you can advocate for being treated properly and have your work respected in the manner in which you negotiated it to be respected in the start. Just because it is written in a contract doesn't mean it stops there and automatically everybody follows contractual provisions. And you don't write in express terms like you will respect me and my artistic vision, clause 3A in a contract, right? I mean, that is implied when it comes with the price that you pay and when you talk about your resume and your CV and your portfolio comes into the picture. Now, if that is an implied term or an implied clause in a contract, then you must advocate for it. You must negotiate, continue to negotiate that term and make sure that term is upheld. And that is 100% a very difficult task, especially when you're already in a relationship with the designer, or you already have a relationship, ongoing working relationship. You think, oh, things are bad, I don't want it to get worse. But frankly, it is already bad. So that means that it didn't go the way it envisioned. That means this is not the relationship you signed up for. And if it's not the deal you negotiated and not the deal you signed up for, then who else is going to advocate a way out for it or advocate the right terms for it but you? And that is really important. And again, I'm using the word advocate over and over again simply because while the title sounds very attractive, battle of two creatives, again, it's not a battle, because if you see yourself as battling someone else, then you will either be a complete winner or a complete loser in this situation. But it is an advocacy. You will feel a little bit of pain. There will be something that has to give at some point, but that doesn't mean that you can't feel the kind of job satisfaction that you want in a situation like this. And that is very important. So always remember, negotiating something doesn't mean, oh, I negotiated the contract, I did my job, things are done, now is that's it. You negotiated implied things into the contract too: respect, create, your vision being respected, your art being considered, or valued properly, being treated decently and well. And all those things, if are not being upheld, then you also must continue to advocate for yourself and continue negotiating better terms. Also, other thing I want to add quickly is that just because you had a particular position at the start, right, that doesn't mean that you are stuck to that position forever and ever. If things have dramatically moved from what was initially or envisioned or initially negotiated. So for instance, let's say in this situation, he was supposed to design maybe 2 rooms, an interior designer, for instance, and he was supposed to design 2 rooms. And now this guy says, we did the 2 rooms, but I hate them. So you're going to design 2 more rooms for me. Or I'm going to tear down the 2 rooms that were designed and you're going to redesign them for me. But the contract said you were going to design 2 rooms and that's it. Don't feel trapped. Again, think about what the circumstances were when you entered that negotiation, or when you negotiated that first relationship or that first contract were, and then think about whether where you are right now is where you thought that it would end up. Because if it is radically different, then you're negotiating something else altogether, right? Because the other side has changed their terms, and you are equally then free not to change your terms, but to negotiate alternate terms. And never feel trapped. That's basically the short of it. That's basically what I wanted to add to the conversation.
No, those are very useful ideas. You know, the fact that you're always constantly negotiating. When things don't go in accordance with the contract that you have already negotiated, then what do you do after that? Do you continue negotiating? Let's say if someone has agreed to payment terms in a contract but it doesn't happen, then the question is, do you negotiate with this person, understand why are the payments not forthcoming? Are you able to do something about it and negotiate another form of payment, negotiate tranche payments, etc.? Yes, I want to talk about deadlock situations, because this is something that has often perplexed me, because we sometimes talk about the ideal situation where we're able to negotiate something into a settlement or a win-win situation. What happens when we are deadlock situation? What happens if someone says take it or leave it, right? And we can't reach an agreement at all. What would you advise people in such a situation?
Okay, deadlocks are yeah, deadlocks are tough. Jeremiah, do you wanna perhaps give your view?
No, I'm just gonna say take it or leave it, and if you can't leave it, then you have no choice but to take it, right? The person who can't walk away will have to take it. If I can walk away, I will walk away. You know, it's like when you go to the Pasar Malam, right? Chatuchak market or whatever it is, you go to the first store and they ask for like 100 baht. Don't want, you walk away. And then the more you go inside the market, the cheaper it becomes, right? So when you know in your negotiation, you know your worth and you stand firm with it, they will come and say, okay, 95 baht, 90 baht, or whatever it is, it goes down. So if you are in a slightly privileged position, and I must qualify, yeah, because only when you're at a privileged position that you can walk away. That means I don't take this job, I know I'm going to get another job, I know my self-worth, I'm not going to do this because already at this stage it's going to be like that. It's going to take it or leave it situation. Then if I come into this project, it will be take it or leave it situation throughout the whole project. I can't work with this person, right? Because he's no longer a collaborator. He becomes my master, or he becomes my employer, or he becomes my boss, so to speak. And if you can't live with that, then don't, because you will really regret going into that situation as this. Yeah. Sorry, Shakti. Yeah.
Oh no, definitely super helpful. But maybe if I can add some theory to this, so that I can put it into like theory terms a little bit. I think deadlocks happen for like three major reasons. Either there's a substantive, procedural, or emotional interest of either one or both of the parties that really hasn't been satisfied. So if you're looking to break a deadlock, you really need to identify which of the three has happened, or which multiples of the 3 points has happened. So for instance, if the deadlock is substantive, you can change maybe the following: the assumptions the parties are relying on, the underlying assumptions, the information that may be available to both of the parties, the views of the costs of the project for both parties, because these are substantive issues, perhaps, that it's a lack of information, for instance, or a lack of understanding of the problem, which is why you end up in a deadlock in the first place. So a deadlock, the first thing must be identified is that usually if it's a substantive deadlock, that means that there's an information mismatch on either side, or a lack of information on either side. Now, we want to be careful not to let a deadlock situation worsen to the point it becomes a total communication breakdown. Because if you have a communication breakdown, that means that parties are unwilling to even share how the deadlock came about. So in a deadlock situation, if you find like in Jeremiah's Chatuchak example, it is in that situation, it is a substantive thing. It's a view on the cost, right, of the item. The producer of the item thinks it's worth 200 baht or whatever, and then you think it's only worth 100. Now, obviously in Chatuchak, you're not going to go into a detail of where this item was made and what were the cost of the sewing materials, etc. But in a more I guess in a creative industry, actually that information may be more helpful to you, and may actually help with an understanding of of perhaps the cost view that each party takes of the same issue. Because from a producer's perspective and from an actor's perspective, the cost situation may look completely different, right? And if a producer wants to get out of a deadlock too and is willing to share, look, I need to pay for set, it's outdoor, I have to work at location, I need to pay taxes to a particular location, I have to go and get special cameras for underwater shooting, then from the actor's perspective, oh, I see, your budget runs higher than what I expected, and adding $10,000 to your budget may be something that really is super uncomfortable. Let me now look for a situation. That's one way of getting out of a substantive deadlock, because of a lack of information. So that's a substantive deadlock. If you have a emotional deadlock, for instance, then sometimes, like Jeremiah we discussed earlier, or Liansheng said, like stepping out, taking a break may actually help. Emotional deadlocks are when I mean, as I keep we've repeated throughout, human beings are emotional creatures. We really are very much buoyed by what we feel and what the other party is giving off in terms of feelings and emotions. And sometimes the deadlock can really just be because the speed of the discussions was too fast. You're forced to make a decision within like 2 hours, for instance, and you feel stressed out by it. The negotiators personalities or style, perhaps even the physical environment you're in. If you're going to be negotiating in a dingy, like strange place, or somebody keeps saying, hey, please get out of here, the cafe is closing in an hour, there are a lot of other things that make people feel stressed out and panicky. And sometimes just changing that environment and your emotional state of mind can help deal with the deadlock situation. You may actually have a different perspective if the tone changes, the mood changes, the location changes, the time of day changes. It could just be, perhaps let's take a break for half an hour or 1 hour, or let's talk about this tomorrow morning, or I will come back to you on a call. Anything, like I said earlier, email is perhaps not the best way. If you find like one person is choosing to email, you can say, hey, maybe I'll give a call and we can discuss this over the phone. Sometimes that helps break a deadlock situation if it is emotionally charged, for instance. A third sort of deadlock situation which occurs is a process deadlock situation. So, for instance, this is the most difficult, honestly, because if it's a process based situation, that means that um, for instance, one party may be trying to go on a fishing expedition rather than genuinely attempting to settle the matter. They're just asking for the sake of asking, making things difficult, or they're keeping you on hold while they are negotiating with like 10 other parties in bad faith, perhaps. So, I mean, this is really the hardest deadlock to get out of, because honestly, this is when most people start to feel, hey, this negotiation is unfair. And the second you have those feelings or perception of unfairness, then people do not want to be in that position anymore and start to dig their heels in even further. And that really makes for the most difficult kind of deadlock. And honestly, the best way to get out of such a process deadlock is to change the whole process, i.e., start again. Now, this is not feasible in all situations, and sometimes this sort of deadlock, unfortunately, leads to not very fun outcomes of dropping the entire negotiation altogether. But these, honestly speaking, a process deadlock situation is the rarer of the three deadlock situations. Most of the time, most deadlocks are truly because of a lack of information and a lack of understanding between parties, or the emotional state of mind of parties are not primed for negotiating at all. A process deadlock may also, if you really find in such a situation, that is when a change of parties may actually help altogether. It could very well be that the manner in which these two parties have approached this negotiation has resulted in this, and restarting a negotiation from scratch may end up in the same result. If, for instance, there's an opportunity for you to lean on other resources, then it may be helpful to rely on other resources to help you gain some additional perspective or try and find an alternative to a deadlock. I mean, again, all of these sound super theoretical, but the honest answer is that if you've hit a deadlock, or you end up with an ultimatum, right? The difficulties with these sort of situations is that even if an ultimatum is accepted, the winning party may end up modifying the terms or eventually even walking away from the whole deal. So, an ultimatum is basically a sign that the negotiation not hasn't just hit a deadlock situation, but is heading towards a negotiation breakdown, because this is a take it or leave it. Now, I'm not saying that having a bottom line therefore is a bad thing, and that you should always be amenable and pliable to situations, but never feel never feel trapped. That's the only thing. There's no situation in which you should ever feel trapped, because no one can trap you except you. You feel trapped because you feel like you are placed in a, there's something operating on your mind, or that you have internalized as being so crucial that you feel trapped by it. And if you can try and feel more or less, and usually at that stage when you feel trapped is when feelings of hopelessness come in, and panic and fear, and again that leads to what I said, emotional deadlock. So it becomes a cycle. Once you anticipate you're headed into a bad situation, the other person makes an ultimatum, you feel panic, we're back to a deadlock situation. And it just feels like a cycle you can't get out of. So what we discussed right at the start of this, sometimes taking time and space away from that negotiation, or looking for true alternatives, meaning either another party or further information, all of these things will end up with much better different results. And I mean, very, very unfortunately, there are some days where deadlocks are just unresolvable, and that's a bad deal for both parties, and you can't resolve it. So that would be unfortunate. But really, most people actually see deadlocks coming, just that they continue to soldier through. And that is where you have problems, because you are then contributing to a deadlock situation as well. It's not I found myself in a deadlock, it is I also walked there, and I ended up trapping myself as well, and then I felt trapped. Because the other side is going to say the same thing too. It's not that the other side feels any better about a deadlock situation either. So that's really what my views are on this.
I
Sure.
just wanted to I just wanted to add a small point. Even if you feel trapped, okay, unfortunately you feel trapped and you took it because you were desperate at that point in a deadlock situation and you signed a contract, and subsequent to that you regret it, don't worry, because legally you can try and get out of the contract if you plead duress or undue influence. So there are even if you at that point in time you were so trapped and you were so desperate and you signed it, right? And immediately after that you regretted it, and after a day or two you thought about it and said, no, I really don't want it. Then you can go and see a lawyer to get out of the contract. And there are two ways of getting out of that contract: by pleading undue influence or duress, if that happens. I just wanted to add that. Okay. Yeah, sorry, Liansheng.
No worries. We have about 15 minutes left. I actually have two more scenarios, but I thought maybe what we do is we go straight into the Q&A, because I see quite a number of good questions being posed, and I just wanted to hear your thoughts about those two those questions. One being the issue of when do you know it's right to walk out of a negotiation. I think that's an important point to cover just before we end this seminar as well.
Gut feel. Really, it's gut feel. Nobody has the answer but yourself. I mean, that having said, when we started the whole seminar about mentally preparing, knowing whether you can walk out of it or whatever it is at the end of the day, and if you, I mean, there's sometimes when I go into negotiation, something at the back of my mind says, no, don't, okay? And I just have to trust it and say, and even if you have to end it, and if you walk away from it, don't be nasty. Just say, I'm so sorry. I think it's a great opportunity to have this opportunity to talk to you. Unfortunately, at this moment, I can't do this project because of whatever it is, or I'm busy. Thank you for thinking of me. Do consider me the next time. Don't burn your bridges. That's what I'll say. Yeah.
Actually, you reminded me of something, because sometimes when I go through even negotiations or mediation in the cases I do, I knew it was not going to settle. But I always ask myself at the end of the negotiation, when I walk out of it, have I done my best? Have I tried what I can do? I think that's something that I always think about as well when I'm ending a negotiation, and of course to then preserve the relationship and make sure that things are not have not gone south. Shakti, anything to add?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Jeremiah, that's an excellent point about gut feel. For the people who are not so in tune with their gut, sometimes Liansheng's technique is the diligent way to go about it, right? To attempt as many alternatives, as many techniques as possible before you come to the conclusion that, look, this is really not going to work out for me. The important point, though, really comes back right to the first point, which is really about preparation. Like, if you do not do that preparation, then you have not done your due diligence for yourself. I mean, not about the other party at all. It's for you, right? If you have not examined what is important to you, and you have not examined what exactly is crucial or important when it comes to this particular negotiation that you're entering for this particular matter. And again, for different things, for certain projects, for instance, you may be so excited about being a name added to that project that, you know, the price may be something you are willing to you know, be a little bit more flexible on. In another matter, for instance, the price may be something you're absolutely not flexible on, maybe given the life circumstances or whatever situation you are in at that particular time in your life. So that due diligence is definitely important, because you mustn't feel the worst part about walking away from negotiation is regret, right? Like, you mustn't ever feel like, hey, I was the one who screwed myself over. I was the one who messed up, you know, for myself. And I think a lot of us feel this when we let's say we rejected something and we tell ourselves, oh, I did a great job, and then you see somebody else having received that position, and hey, they, for whatever reason, managed to get the benefits or the things that you somehow couldn't negotiate for yourself. And then, you know, you have a sour grapes situation there where you're like, oh, you know, I didn't want it anyway, or, you know, those sort of things to soothe yourself. But that doesn't feel great. You must always then think, what did that person perhaps do, or maybe what did that person say that helped him advocate, or herself advocate for him or herself, that you maybe were unwilling or unable to do. I mean, if it is something that you are unable to do and that you knew or identified as a weakness, that would be very helpful to, you know, try and get some help and talk to someone who may be able to assist you in that regard. Or the alternative is that you were unwilling to do it, then you must really examine and ask yourself, why was I unwilling to advocate for myself for that particular project? I mean, it really could be that you thought that the project was not as valuable as it turned out to be. Sometimes we just make unfortunate decisions. Or sometimes it really could just be that at that point in time in your life, you just were not at a stage where you valued your work perhaps as much, or you didn't feel confident in the type of services you were able to bring. It's a question about it's two parts to it, right? Yeah, gut feel is definitely there, but for those who don't trust their gut as much, or who don't have what they feel is a lot of luck, then due diligence is key. And trying your best and attempting these techniques and preparing and trying your best to work out some kind of solution for yourself is important, in giving yourself the opportunity to succeed and the opportunity to you know, get that role, or get that position or that job or whatever it is.
I have one interesting question, which I also wanted to explore with the panelists. There's this question about cultural differences in negotiations. How do you go about dealing with such cultural differences when you're negotiating with someone of a different background, someone who probably doesn't have the same understanding as you?
I have a person.
No, go ahead, Jeremiah.
I have a person working in. I was doing a musical in Manila. It's a complete different cultural experience, because the theatre practice in Singapore and the theatre practice in the Philippines is quite different. So for a long time, I was wondering why I can't get through certain things that I wanted, until I sat down with my Filipino producer, and he looked at me and said, "Don't colonize us." And it was such a powerful word to me when he used the word colonize. And I asked him, no, what do you mean by colonizing you? Because he said that you from Singapore, you come to Philippines, you want to come and work with us, collaborate with us, but you're bringing all your Singaporean ideas without even asking us, without even sharing with us, without even understanding us, and you're just telling us what to do. That's colonization. And they've had enough of colonization from the Spanish, from the British, so they are seeing this as another colonization. And to me, that was the biggest cultural lesson I've ever learned, is that just because you think that you're efficient, just because Singaporeans, we are so used to having a 10 o'clock meeting, 11 o'clock meeting, 12 o'clock meeting, 2 o'clock meeting. He looked at me and said, no, that is not possible. I said, why? And then he looked at me and said, traffic jam. right? In Manila, it's traffic jam, and so you have to space out, say, at least 4 hours between meetings. And for them, the day starts at 4 p.m. My day starts at 9 a.m. Again, it's a cultural difference. And they rehearse up to very late. And then after rehearsal, they will have the parties to eat together, drink together, whatever. It's cultural. So don't think just because you have the best practice and you go to somewhere or you talk to somebody that should be the practice. You know, I feel that observation is important whenever we want to work with somebody who is not you've never worked with before. We've got 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 nose holes and 1 mouth. We should observe more rather than dictate in that sense. Yeah. So yeah, that to me is a very, very valuable lesson learned in terms of cultural differences.
Yeah, that is really excellent, Jeremiah. I think that if I can draw back to our negotiation tips, right, that actually goes towards the point 2 where we talk about shared problem solving. So Jeremiah, you went there in order to, you know, collaborate with them and be a part of their production, etc. And they obviously invited you into their world to again do exactly the same thing. But the first step, I think, in that shared problem solving is that one, information was lacking between parties, right? You know, it didn't occur to you perhaps to think about whether there were cultural differences. Sometimes the word Asian is not good enough, right? Like, you know, we all live different lives, and as you rightly said, we don't expect, it doesn't take 4 hours to get anywhere in Singapore because the whole country is 4 hours. That's it. You can get from one end to the other in 2. So, you know, that's a completely different mindset. So information gathering is key. Making sure that you are ready and prepared to understand the other party is very important. I think, Jeremiah, had you had maybe even one person happen to tell you, hey, you know, traffic jams in Philippines are bad, you just can't have like meetings all the time, you wouldn't then have suggested a back-to-back meeting sort of situation. You were not insensitive in that sense, you just lacked information, right? And obviously from their perspective, they felt, you know, stressed out because they didn't realize that in Singapore is, to them that life is normal and to you this life is normal. So information sharing is one thing. And then again, the last part, which I think was good, was you appeal to their senses, right? Which is tip number 5. You sat down your producer and talked to them and said, hey, something is off about this relationship. Like, I thought we had a better thing going on, and my understanding was that we were all happy to do this together. And that talking to that person suddenly allowed you the opportunity to build that relationship with that person, and therefore negotiate, I guess, that ongoing relationship, right? Better terms for yourself, and for that party, advocate for themselves, the Philippines production company. So, you know, these things, yeah, I mean, the theory that you've learned now for like spent an hour and a half listening to, again, sounds very airy fairy and stuff, but the reality is effective communication is managing emotions, preparing, and also making sure that you have sufficient information. Like 90% of the problems here are because parties, when they come and negotiate a relationship with each other, don't know what the other side is thinking. You're so focused on your side, you're so focused on your objectives and your goals, that you forget that the other side views the same issue in a completely different light. And if your goal is to find that shared problem and fix it, that solution, or find a problem, solve a problem together, even things like cultural differences can be resolved, because no matter how much you think the Filipinos are nice and friendly and lovely people, right? I mean, that's again an assumption we have, right? It's not a wrong assumption, just that it's still semi information versus the remaining part of the information that was missing. You know, you just can't operate on that assumption and that information alone. And the same works in the reverse as well. So sharing of information from yourself to better your relationship with the other side, and receiving information or asking for information from the other side in order to manage a relationship better.
Hi, there are a lot more questions coming in. Maybe what I'll do is I will try to extend it by a bit so that we can try to answer the questions of the attendees, because it seems that they are very excited and then have some questions after listening to the seminar. One of the questions is, you know, when negotiating between parties, it has become in a way, has it become more prevalent in the arts and creative worlds, or is it also equally applicable when it comes to areas that are more mundane and technical, like construction? These skills on negotiation, do you think it applies only to the arts, or do you think it can be applied wholesale throughout?
I think it is wholesale, but I think the good thing about it is the creative industry is beginning to be woke, if that's the word, is the word for it. And they are now more attuned. They're not so timid about negotiating. In the past, right, if a producer gives you a contract, a lot of actors do not even dare look at the contents. They just sign because they just want to work. I think now more and more people are becoming more aware that they can negotiate, they have a right to negotiate, and they have a right to look at the terms. Even when it is a standard contract, this standard contract can, within reasonable negotiation, be amended to suit your requests. It all can be done. It all can be done. So if that's if that situation, I would say that the arts industry is more prevalent than the mundane industry, because in the technical industry or in the construction industry, you can also negotiate. It's a question of how do you negotiate and how do you make the other party, as what Shakti says, see your point of view and you see their point of view and come to an amicable term to agree upon.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Jeremiah, you're absolutely right. When it comes to different industries, actually everybody negotiates, just that nobody talks about it because you're not interested in any other industry except yours. So, I mean, if you're going to ask a person in construction whether they negotiate their contracts, the answer is yes, just that, you don't really care about the technical elements of like how many tons of cement are going to be delivered and where and when and whether they met any regulatory requirements, and similarly they are not super interested in like your IP rights, etc., because it doesn't feature in their world. That's the only difference. So I actually think in fact when it comes to the arts industry, negotiation is even more important because it's not a product, right? It's you are the product that is being sold, and it's your output and your creativity. And if nothing else, that is the most it is the most difficult product to quantify and qualify, simply because um it can't be replicated, and therefore it's even more important again to advocate for yourself. Always remember, negotiating is nothing but advocacy for yourself and making sure that you are protecting your brand, your image, your reputation, and building your portfolio along with it. So negotiating is serving the purpose of helping you promote your lifestyle and your artistic brand and talent further, and is therefore key in making sure for your own self-development. Yeah, so the short answer is everybody does it everywhere in every industry. I mean, there are contracts abound for anything. Anything is a contract, by the way. I mean, even if an oral agreement is a contract, I'm sure if you say, hey, I'll come for 2 days, and the other person says, okay, I'll pay you $100, that's a contract too. You can negotiate that as well. Just because we don't formally see it as a contract doesn't mean that it's not a contract and cannot be negotiated. Yeah.
Yes, yes. Actually, even personally, like I shared, I see a lot of tips being helpful in my everyday life as well. Being sensitive to the other party, understanding where the other party is coming from, being a little bit inquisitive, taking a less adversarial approach. I always share with people when I first negotiated my first playwriting contract with another company, I thought I would have done it differently had I learned the skills I had learned now today. So these are all the things that are helpful even in your everyday lives, I feel. Unfortunately, I'm being chased. We are nearing the end. I have to bring the Q&A session to a close. But like what Shakti was saying, a lot of the skills that we learn today or are sharing today deals with self-advocacy, trying to advocate for your own rights. And that's what we at Law Society Pro Bono Services have been doing as well, giving you the skills, giving you the knowledge. We have also had a lot of resources, including the Advocates for the Arts book, which is a resource that you can download from your tab. This is published by us, targeted at giving you very bite-sized, good legal information as a creative freelancer. because we understand that a lot of freelancers have unequal bargaining power, and what better way to improve your bargaining power by having the knowledge and resources behind it. So I hope that you have found our webinar today useful. There are a lot of tips that have been shared, including information gathering, the 5 tips that Shakti shared, which I'd like to summarize. The first being dampening your adversarial edge. 2, having a shared problem-solving perspective, both on your part and the other person's part. 3, reframing the content and reframing the discussion, asking why, being inquisitive. 4, building on other people's ideas so that you get their buy-in, and then you build a product or a bridge together to resolve your differences. And lastly, to appeal on the other party's senses so that we are not looking at a very adversarial approach with a win-lose outcome. I also have to add that the Law Society Pro Bono Services Office and Bloomberg are very happy to organize a hands-on workshop that is going to be fixed on the 23rd of March 2021. This is a workshop for 20 participants. We are doing a hands-on workshop. We'll be utilizing some of the skills that we have shared today, apply them on some scenarios and hypothetical situations. An email will be sent out to the attendees today. If you're interested, do sign up. There are only 20 slots because we are trying to make it very personalized and ensure that the skills are taught to our attendees for this workshop. So seats are very limited. And lastly, it leaves me to thank both Shakti and Jeremiah for sharing interesting insights as well as stories about negotiation and the skills of negotiation. On behalf of the Law Society Pro Bono Services Office and Bloomberg, thank you to the attendees as well. I see that many have joined us. We have more than 100 attendees today. And thank you all. Any last words, Jeremiah and Shakti?
Always advocate for yourself.
Yes. Always appreciate yourself and don't be afraid to negotiate. Yes.
Yes. Thank you. And with that, thank you all for joining us. Thank you, the panelists, for sharing. Have a great evening ahead. Thank you. Goodbye.